Discover the Our MedTech Lives podcast, where industry experts share their career stories, key achievements, and insights into overcoming challenges in the MedTech field. Hosted by Zilko Rima and Kash Ikram.
Hi everyone. Today we have Glyn Burtt from Grendel Games. Glyn is medical business development at Glendale Games, where they enable training and education and learning through gamification. And it's an absolutely fascinating area to explore, especially when it comes to medical training. So with that, welcome Glyn to our MedTech Lives.
Thanks, Kash. Thanks, Silke. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Glyn. We start with the first question, as always. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And we know already that you are a doctor. So, of course, it would be very interesting to know how you ended up in MedTech.
For me, it's an interesting journey. I've loved everything I've done. So I'm now 53. I went to medical school in 1990 and absolutely loved it. I'm really a medical person. So doing that and being able to train in medicine was kind of, I come from a background which wouldn't have naturally taken you into medical training. I didn't have a sort of spirit upbringing by any means. And so to be able to go to university, study medicine, I was the first person in my family go to university. It was
Where
nice.
did you grow up, Glyn?
I grew up in Watford.
Watford?
I grew up
probably
on
the
those
only person
housing
in
estates.
Watford to go to university.
There's a lot of people in Watford who went to university, but not from the Meriden estate where I grew up, where it's kind of the police would stop you on the way in and ask you if you had a knife, and if you said no, they'd offer you one.
There you go.
So
you're going to need this.
Very, very lucky to be able to go. And I enjoyed my medical studies. And during my medical studies, I absolutely fell in love with surgery. I think I'd always wanted to be a surgeon, but it reinforced that. And so after medical school, I did my house jobs. And then I got into fantastic basic surgical training rotation in Bedford, of all places, and with some really, really inspiring, brilliant surgeons who really gave a love of surgery to me. And so from there, I went on to higher surgical training on the East Anglian rotation centred around Cambridge, Norwich, Ipswich and Colchester, where I was trained to be a urologist, and absolutely loved urology because of the technology side of it. There's nothing quite like toys in the operating room. If you're a urologist, you get all of the metal work, you get imaging systems, you get lasers.
Robots?
Yeah, eventually in Cambridge we had robots. I think Cambridge was the first one of the first or second urology units in the UK to introduce the Da Vinci. And it was fascinating watching that being deployed for the first time with John Kelly and Prof. Neil. It was an amazing experience watching that learning curve beginning and their first cases and then widespread adoption for all of the procedures. Yeah, urology was great, not only because of the technology, but because you have a lot of very solvable patient problems. There's a whole lot of unmet needs there still, which are still being researched and looked at now. But fundamentally, in urology, you can make people very happy or you can cure their cancer, which is something I didn't see so much of on the GI side when I was doing upper GI surgery for a bit and other places. So urology has a lot of benign disease, which has a lot of very important patient implications for quality of life, whether that's continence surgery, stone surgery. It has bladder cancer surgery, kidney cancer surgery, and prostate cancer surgery, and it has a whole lot of technologies that you can now deploy to deal with all of those things, especially on the BPH side, which is still fascinating.
Fantastic. It was University of Cambridge you went to do medicine.
I did. For me, from a council house in Watford, that was a bit of a culture shock.
Total culture shock. I went to Reading and I was in a culture shock. Heaven forbid going to Cambridge and getting
But it was a very supportive and nurturing environment. I'd say it was a culture shock because of the people I got to mix with. I think back then it was about 40% had come from private schools compared to now, which I think is a little bit less now, but it's still way more than the national average for people who are educated privately. So there's still a bit of an imbalance going on there. Which has improved, but it was yes. I never quite understood that question, which school did you go to? Because for me, it was the comprehensive school down the road, and it didn't mean much.
No.
So how long have you been in the hospital environment?
So 6 years of medical school, which 3 was spent in the hospital environment. Then I carried on working in the NHS for 10 years, including my training.
Wow.
And then you decided to move to MedTech, right?
I did because I could no longer operate. I contracted HIV, through entirely my own fault. And so it was not medically related from my disastrous personal life at the time. And that forced a change in direction, because back then we didn't know that highly active antiretroviral therapy would keep your viral load so low that it would be non-transmissible through daily contact or even invasive procedures. So at that time I had a complete crisis of everything, really. I became very depressed. I didn't know whether I wanted to continue in medicine, because I'd always wanted to be a surgeon. I found the surgical side of treating patients much more interesting than prescribing drugs and managing chronic disease. It has a very instant result mentality to it. You do something, the patients get better or they don't. And in all other aspects of medicine, it's a very prolonged patient relationship with no real juncture that you can change the course of their illness. You're just monitoring them over a period of time. It may be cardiology and some of the other disciplines have it, but surgery is really a very doing thing. You get instant results, and that's what I liked about it most. It was you could make a big difference, and you could do it in a very short period of time, and patients would get better and experience better quality of life. And so there wasn't another medical specialty that I wanted to retrain in.
Mm-hmm.
And so having looked around at the kind of jobs that were around at the time, I happened to come across a product manager job at Olympus. In the urology sphere, we recently had a big hospital conversion to all Olympus urology equipment at Luton and Dunstable. And it was a very well-managed conversion. All of the new equipment came in, the training was superb. And we got a very good look at the nuts and bolts of how all of those things fitted together. I really liked the Olympus equipment. I thought, why not? I applied knowing at the time very little about MedTech, apart from being on the customer side of some interactions with some very good representatives and salespeople from each of the companies. And I didn't really know what I was going into, but I applied.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, that must have been a dark time in your life, right? After dedicating a decade to becoming a doctor. I mean, there were options. You could have stayed in the medical field, but then very brave to say, you know what, I'm going to take a different path. I'm going to take a path I'm going to find more interesting.
And would allow me to continue working in the surgical sphere.
Yeah.
In a very different way. And obviously we can come back and talk about how the influence of MedTech in the surgical space is massive.
Right.
There are so many procedures which are now defined by the device which is being used.
Yes.
That is actually a fascinating area to be in, which is why I loved it. So I threw my hat in the ring at Olympus.
Yes.
I had a first interview, which didn't really tell me much about the company, but I got through that one. And it certainly didn't tell me much about the process of working in medical technology company. And then I had a second interview with two great guys, Gareth Walsh and Richard Lawrence, and they absolutely grilled me. And I wasn't expecting, because it was a product management role, I wasn't expecting to be asked, how do you sell something? And it was okay, I'm not quite sure how to answer this question. And I didn't think I'd ever sold anything. But then thinking through it, I realized that actually almost every interaction I've been having with a patient for the past 10 years in surgery was involved with me asking a lot of open questions, trying to pinpoint what the problem with the patient was.
Yeah.
And then proposing and suggesting solutions to that patient, which may be the right one for them, and then balancing that with the risks and mitigations for that. And it turns out that's almost exactly like a sales process. It's like a lot of questions to define the customer problem, thinking about which of your solutions best meet that customer's needs. I think me being able to translate that on the spot from what I have been doing for 10 years in medicine into a sales process may well have landed me that job. But I came in right at the bottom. I came in as a standard project manager at Olympus with responsibility for the urology portfolio, obviously because that's what I knew best. And then over a period of time, got to know a lot about the business. I had some fantastic teachers at Olympus, Rich Reynolds, Nick Williams, who really knew the business backwards. Were very sensible and down to earth, and really educated me in the way of medical devices.
Do you still remember your feelings on the first day being on the other side?
I remember the second day very, very well. The first day was a bit of a blur, getting my laptop, getting laptop training and all of that. The second day was a big sales celebration event, which Olympus back then held at the Dorchester in London. So it was, go down to London, go to the Dorchester Hotel, we'll let you in at 7 o'clock, go and take a table with people I'd never met before from all over the company in the UK. And it was the sales awards ceremony. that really was a baptism of fire. Having gone from a non-selling and non-sales reward environment in the NHS to going and seeing that sales is taken very seriously and we recognise high performers in sales, this is a very important part of the environment. That was a baptism of fire.
Yeah, I think coming back to the selling, I mean, if you're married or you got kids, especially if they're millennials, selling is a huge part of your day, right? And negotiation, right? So a lot of people, think about, well, can I sell? But we do it in so many walks of life, every day of the week. Anytime you need to persuade somebody else of a new project or a course of action, you're essentially selling, even if you don't realize it. But coming from the NHS doctors, right? Selling is like a dirty word, right? I'm like, oh my God, I
It is
don't sell.
because we never think of what we do. We never think of what we do as a selling engagement with someone. But every time you want to influence someone, you're using sales skills. But yeah, it's like there was the No Free Lunch campaign, which ran for many, many years when I was in the NHS, which was directly trying to stop doctors engaging with salespeople.
Yeah.
And of course, NHS procurement now has moved on in a very different way. Doctors maybe aren't even the customer anymore. So
Yeah.
that's a big change. But back then, I existed in a surgical community where the surgeons had great power. And if they wanted something, it would be delivered to the hospital the next week with a purchase order from sister written up immediately and given to the rep for the delivery. Thank God that's changed.
I remember whenever there was one of these TV shows about, hospitals, and the rep was there, like Grey's Anatomy, I think the rep turned up. And we're always the bad guy. The rep was the bad guy in the show trying to rip off the hospital. And you say, hey, kids, that's what I do.
But that is so far from reality, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
even back when I was still practicing, so many times the company representative got me out of trouble because there might be something that I didn't completely understand about the brand new device we were using. We were having training on it, and even after the training, it might be that I was about to use it wrong or had the wrong power settings. And so I think most doctors now acknowledge and recognise the role the medical device company representatives have in the operating room, the cath lab, and the safety that it helps to bring to patient care.
100%.
Do you think you would be a different customer today after all these years in MedTech?
So it depends. On the pharma side, it's always an evidence-based thing, isn't it? So I would always be asking the drug reps, okay, talk me through that study, but then actually talk me through the details of the trial and let me understand whether this is going to be applicable to the patients. On the MedTech side, I was desperate to see new toys.
Yeah.
So very welcoming to the device people. Come in, let's have a look at it. How is it going to work? Can it change what I'm doing? And I think that was the case for almost everyone. Is that like the shiny thing was exactly what we wanted to see and play with. Would I be different now? I now understand how hard they work. And I understand how hard everyone in MedTech work. I went to Olympus, and one of the things that Richard Lawrence said to me was, "You're never going to work as hard as you work here." He said it's going to seem much harder than when you're working the NHS. And I thought I used to do a 1 in 3 on call sometimes. Sometimes I go in on a Friday morning and not leave until Monday evening. It can't possibly be harder than that. And then I realised that I am working harder
in a different way. And Olympus is a Japanese company, right? So you have a lot of different cultures there. Japanese, I think it's heavily influenced by the German organization as well, right?
Yes.
Add some color to that. How did you find the working culture at Olympus?
So I was based in Olympus, UK and Ireland, Olympus KeyMed as it was.
Yes.
And so very strong links with the Olympus European organisation, equally strong links with Japan, and growing links with the US organisation. So a complete melting pot of cultural spectrums. And obviously very, very different cultural ways of working.
Yes.
The Olympus in the UK had a very defined management process. It had a very defined way that we wanted territory managers to work in the field, and it had a very defined audit process at that. And then cross-culturally, lots of influencing and relationships with the Japanese part of the company. Obviously, with a lot of Japanese cultural introductions that we were given and helped with, because it is culturally very different. And on each of my visits to Tokyo, each time I realised that I understood Japan less. But so many things did make sense. It's like, so well, I don't know whether you've ever sat through a presentation of a Japanese PowerPoint. One slide will have about 1,000 ideas on it, and they will walk you through them very carefully. And it's all related to how Japanese script works. So a single iconography of Japanese script can represent a complete idea all in one. So it's not unusual for Japanese to have 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 different ideas on one slide, which is very difficult for us to understand.
Yes.
Culturally, decisions were always made before meetings. So it would be impossible to change a decision in a meeting, because unless you had done the groundwork to meet with the stakeholders and the influences before the meeting, you did not have a chance to change things on the day of the meeting. There was a lot of cultural expectation that these meetings were just to say yes to an idea, and all of the work had to have been done before. Whereas the German aspect of the company, and this is a generalization, was a little bit more flexible, but hierarchical. Japan also hierarchical, but different. And then the US part of the company, we had quite an expansion of the US part of the company with the acquisition of Gyrus ACMI while I was at Olympus, so interesting acquisition. And it led to a lot of new ideas about how to develop surgical technologies in a very agile way. And so there was kind of a difference of cultures around how we would move forward with things. Absolutely fascinating melting pot to be in. And I love the cultural differences.
Yeah. But then you made even different cultural difference by going to an American company.
I did.
I
went
to the other.
And a scale difference as well.
Yeah.
So from Olympus, I went to American Medical Systems.
Yeah.
Again, we're a very urology-focused company, so urology and women's health, dealing with BPH treatments and laser surgery for that, incontinence and penile implants and artificial urinary sphincters. Absolutely fascinating bit of sort of prosthetic urology for solving incontinence problems and erectile dysfunction. And then this big green light laser, which was gaining popularity at the time. And then a lot of stuff for prolapse and incontinence surgery in women. And again, small company, probably 500 people globally at that time. And so from quite a big, large-scale company at Olympus down to a company where I could, if I tried hard enough, know everyone. And I made good links across the US and Europe. So I did know a lot of people, and that made it a lot easier to work because relationships were so much easier to have. Culturally American, very driven by sales results, earnings per share, and eventually having recently been acquired by a pharma company in the US to diversify its portfolio. It was then acquired by Boston Scientific.
But I think you also changed your role, right? You moved into med affairs and medical education.
Oh yeah, so my role descriptions over the years. Okay, so back to Olympus, I joined as a product manager.
Right.
I then gained experience of running the products and interfacing with that whole manufacturing process and getting them to customers. Some marketing, and then we kind of expanded the thread of marketing at Olympus. And I became the general manager of the products department. So I looked after not just the urology stuff, but all of the imaging stuff, ENT, gynecology, with a group of very talented product managers. And then I took on some sales responsibility at Olympus as well. And I took on the sales leadership for the surgical side of the business, which is everything in the OR as opposed to everything in the endoscopy suite. And then when I went to American Medical Systems, it was a marketing director for the European and EMEA business for AMS. For the men's health portfolio, which is the continence stuff and the erectile dysfunction stuff. And then when I went to Boston, I was back in medical education. So that was a great move for me. I'm passionate about the role that training of physicians and surgeons can bring to patient safety, and actually the adoption of new technologies, medical devices, which eventually leads to sales, of course. Because if you don't train people to do it effectively, safely, then their confidence in your device is low, and they're likely to use it less, and they're certainly likely to use it only on the easy patients. So that role of medical education, it's seen as a value add by a lot of companies. This is the thing that we're doing to give back to the medical community, but actually it's right there in the moving through the Rogers diffusion of innovation cycle and the adoption curve from the early adopters through to the early majority. And there's a lot we can do around medical education and training of surgeons safely to use medical devices that can really impact how many patients they're willing to treat.
Glyn, I have a question for clarification, because we have so many different positions, jobs in your CV. And I think people would be interested in having a clear understanding of what each job does, because I took a note last time we spoke that you said med affairs is not being a medical director, is not doing medical education. Can you clarify a little bit on this? Who's doing what and to whom?
Yeah, so I omitted that part of my role at Boston. So I was Director of Medical Affairs and Medical Education for Urology in Europe. So medical affairs can be many things. So medical affairs can be looking at the study data and creating clinical trials that will support the adoption and registration of your devices. It can be the way that you disseminate that to the broader community of people that you're trying to educate about your devices. It can also be the person who looks further than that and looks at how we bring those into safety and regulatory documents that are attached to products. It could be about registration, generating clinical evidence for device registration with an agency, either the FDA or for CE marking. It can be looking at the post-market surveillance parts of it. It can be looking at how we disseminate that information. So it is quite broad. It has touches to medical education because as part of your safety program for a medical device, you're going to want to say that this can only be used by the effectively trained physician. And in fact, in the new EU MDR, there's a lot around how you define what that looks like and how you have to specify it. So there's this interchange of talk between medical affairs and medical education, because now medical education is becoming a reportable thing for the training on your medical device that you might have to report to FDA or within your post-market surveillance to a European regulator.
I think you would have been perfect for this role, having been a clinician, so you understand what the clinician is thinking and needing, what the hospital wants. Having been in sales, so you understand what the sales force needs and what evidence, like you the pharma sales rep comes in, you say, tell me about the clinical trial and how it was performed and the evidence that you're presenting me. So that side of the need and what they need to turn up with. So I think it would have been ideal for you to combine all these different skill sets, and you don't.
And I really enjoyed it, Cash. I really enjoyed that looking at what's our story? What's the story we should be presenting to each of these stakeholders who might be influential in the purchase of a device?
Yes.
So the clinicians now, that group of, even the early majority, are asking to see the clinical trial evidence, especially, like I said, when the device is the procedure. If it's a scalpel, okay, you don't need any evidence because it is the ubiquitous item that's being used. If it's a transcatheter heart valve and the valve itself makes up 95% of the procedure, then it's absolutely essential that you have good clinical trial evidence that you can talk to the clinicians to understand the patient outcomes, the payers to understand the health economics. And the trial data that you gather should be both positioning now for registration of the product, but also adoption and likely future health technology appraisal processes. And I think small companies who are bringing devices to market are very good at getting the FDA data and the CE mark data.
Yeah.
It's a bigger investment when you look at that health economic data for health technology appraisal. And now, I listened to Steve Bell, and Steve and I are very, very much on the same page about this. You're not selling necessarily to clinicians, you're selling to a health ecosystem. And the health ecosystem has to appreciate the benefits to the health ecosystem. And health technology appraisal is going to be with us forever. And so I think half the trials that I was involved in working on and creating were all about that evidence generation for the payers, especially in European markets where we tend to have more rigorous health technology appraisal through agencies like NICE, but also IQWiG in Germany and in France as well, where you just have to have good evidence of economic benefit and patient benefit. It's a double whammy. Is it better and cheaper is what everyone's asking. So we just need to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You weren't chasing a number for a change, right? You didn't have that quarterly number.
I think everyone is, aren't they? I think that we probably need to differentiate about people within pharma and device who are incentivized directly by the number and people who are not. And some roles I think shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But I think inevitably everyone's bonus payment in MedTech is dependent on how well the company does in some way.
100%. Just one question before I let Silke back in. But during this time period, you also moved country, right?
Did I forget to mention that? Yeah. So from the deepest, darkest parts of Essex in Southend, where I was with Olympus,
Deep and
very,
dark.
very fortunate that the next role was in Amsterdam. A little town outside Amsterdam called Brooklyn, which is where the Americans get Brooklyn from.
Yeah. Is that why you're wearing orange? Is that mandatory now that you live in?
I think it might be the lighting catch. It's supposed to be bright red. But yes, it is very orange here. I'm
Yeah.
now in Friesland, which considers itself to be a little bit less orange. But I moved to Amsterdam, where I met my now husband, and had a whale of a time integrating into Dutch society. I'm so deaf I can't speak Dutch, but I can understand quite a lot of it now. And it's a very nice place to live. I think there are lots of very positive things about the Netherlands in terms of infrastructure. Its healthcare system is good, but a little bit overburdened at the moment, like most places. Culturally very rich and scientifically very good.
Yes.
And do you speak the language as well?
Ik spreek een beetje Nederlands, with a very strong English accent still.
Okay.
When I moved to Europe, the shock for me was I was used to NHS hospitals, and I was a sales rep in Central Middlesex Hospital where they would film vampire movies because of the mist coming down the corridors and leaky pipes and how dark it was. And then I go to Europe and there's art on the walls and it's beautiful and marble floors everywhere. And I'm thinking, wow, we always thought we have the best healthcare system in the world. And then you go over to Norway and you walk into reception, it's like an art gallery, right?
We really like when UK people say they move to Europe.
Yes.
It was my own personal Brexit. I did
Yes.
it a few years before
We're
that
Brexit
happened.
refugees, both of us.
I'm a Brexit refugee. But you're right. I was at the University Medical Centre in Groningen yesterday, which is just a little bit up the road from where I am now. And our host was apologising for the poor state of the facilities because they had one window boarded up in one section of the building, and it was this is terrible. I was reminiscing about my first day at the old Charing Cross Hospital when I was a medical student, and a little bit of the old Westminster when it was still open, and then the old Norfolk and Norwich, which was getting run down before the PFI hospital in Norwich was built.
Yes.
Every hospital in Europe looks like it's been built as a brand new PFI hospital. The facilities are superb. The investment is amazing compared to UK hospitals. Everything looks nice and it runs smoothly in all of the high-income countries in Europe, that is.
Yes. Well, Switzerland hospitals are something else.
Okay, Glyn, I think we went through your corporate career, but then you opened your own business, right? So how and why did this happen?
So I moved away from working in MedTech to be consulting for MedTech. So I now offer consulting for various things about health technology appraisal, medical education, surgical training. And I happened to land a gig working with Grendel Games, now Grendel Medical and Grendel Games. I had been a customer when I was at Boston. We developed a training game together for laser surgery, for BPH laser surgery. And it was a fascinating process. I learned that making games is a very serious business when I worked with them because it may be we're developing something that's fun and interesting to engage doctors in their learning journey. But the process of doing it is very scientific and very rigorous, which fascinated me. So we made that game for training on laser surgery. And then we had another idea. Boston has a great product called Spacer, which is a gel which is placed between the prostate and the rectum for men having radiotherapy for the prostate cancer. And it creates a little bit of a gap between the prostate and the rectum so that you can irradiate the prostate but spare the rectum. Some of these men used to get terrible, terrible rectal problems with bleeding, and some of them even required colostomies. And the use of that product could spare the rectal toxicity. But a lot of radiation oncologists remember the really bad old days where a lot of patients had stomas raised and a lot of patients had constant bleeding, a lot of patients had rectal problems. And over the years, they'd massively improved the frequency of that so that patients who were having grade 1 rectal toxicity were vanishingly small. But when you speak to a patient who has grade 1 rectal toxicity, it can mean an increase in going to the toilet 4 times per day, but it can also mean having fecal incontinence once a week. And that's still quite a big burden for patients to live with, even though this is the lowest grade of toxicity that they can appreciate. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to try and help doctors to understand. We want to create a day in the life of a patient who had only had grade 1 toxicity, and a patient who had no toxicity. And so we made a little game, which was a beach game where you had to do some activities. And during those activities, you might or might not be interrupted by a strong urge to go to the toilet. You'd have to interrupt those activities, run down the beach to the toilet at the beach, and then come back and finish solving all of your puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
And having had the opportunity to think about these ideas, I kind of fell in love with Grendel as a company. Mm-hmm. And the way that they were uniquely trying to solve these different training needs that are out there.
Right.
And we spoke, and then they invited me to come and do some work with them. So I've been working with them for the past 3 years nearly now. And one of the ideas that we came up with together was in response to a call for funding from the Wellcome Trust through its Welcome Save program, which is a program to disrupt surgical training globally and provide solutions which are effective in low and middle income countries to address the shortage of surgeons globally. And we were invited to apply for this. And we put together an application which would reduce the cost of surgical simulation, bring in some new technologies, including artificial intelligence, into how you could create training scenarios within surgical simulation. And then because it makes it more interesting and people play these simulators more, if you gamify it, we made a set of games. And so we put all of this together in an adaptive learning journey. We granted a large amount of money, and over the past 2.5 years now, we've been developing these training solutions.
What would you say, what is the big advantage of gaming training compared to simulators?
So there isn't really much difference between a simulator and a game apart from its appearance and the fact that a game is a game. So you don't often see trainees running to the Surgical Skills Centre in their spare time to go and engage with a surgical simulation for the 5th time. But you cannot prise their smartphone out of their hand when they're playing something like Angry Birds. Yeah. So what is it about Angry Birds which makes it compelling that people will want to do it again and again and again? It's a very clever game loop. You've got a thing which is very similar. You want to do this thing like catapult the bird and hit the target. And then each time you come back to it on the next level, it gets a little bit more difficult. So it's already challenging you to increase what you can do. Yes. And then when you succeed, you get a big reward. You get points and you get to move on to the next level. And so it has this slightly increasing cognitive challenge. You're practicing a technical skill as you move the thing across the screen to ping the bird across. You have to get better at the technical skill. The cognitive challenge increases. And each time you do this level design in games, you can move these things up and up and up and up, yes, keeping people engaged because they're practicing something which is just at the right level. Simulators, on the other hand, often just throw you in at the deep end. So if you think about a laparoscopic box trainer, you're asked to do a task and it doesn't really break that task down into its little parts. You're just thrown at it. It's like stack these 6 sugar cubes. I can't stack sugar cubes in a laparoscopic box trainer to save my life. I've done a little bit of laparoscopic surgery, but this task defeats me. But if you break it down into stack 1 cube, stack 2 cubes, stack 3 cubes, and you give me a nice reward for achieving that, like we can do in a game, it makes it much easier to get to the end result, and it makes it much more fun and engaging for people to do, and they come back and they do it voluntarily.
You're getting that reward, kind of that release of hormones in there. Yeah.
But do you think it will replace simulation, or would you say this is step 1 is the game and then you still go to the simulator?
No, I think these things are complementary. And in fact, what we're building is a suite of 3 things. A set of core skills games where you learn how to use your knife, fork and spoon. So you learn how to use laparoscopic instruments. You can pick things up, manipulate them, turn them, cut them and so forth. And then that set of skills then goes into an anatomically realistic environment where you practice that set of skills. And then from those anatomically realistic skill drills, we move you into the procedures where you're actually doing simulated procedures as you would do on any other simulator.
Yeah, I've seen it, Silke, and it's incredible.
Yeah, me too.
It's a proper graphic. It's like you're in a game at the arcade with characters and environments, but you're actually building on the skill set that you need to perform that procedure. It's super clever.
And that's the aim. And you have to make these things have sort of high commercial or high investment value in the art and everything else, because yes, you can make these games, you can make a dirt cheap version of this game and it wouldn't be engaging because it doesn't have that immersion because you haven't created those environments. So being able to teach by analogy in these abstracted environments which aren't exactly like a surgical environment. You need to make that environment just as alive as if it was in the simulator. So we have these rich environments. And there's a lot of science and research that show the training and the learning that happens in the game. And fundamentally, if the thing that you're doing is exactly like the thing you're doing in real life, and we compare the game to a box trainer. So if the exercise you're doing in the game has the same physical requirements as the exercise you're doing in a box trainer, the skills transfer works. And if you're doing it with a set of instruments which are motion sensitive, just like a laparoscopic instrument, then that is an even deeper piece of embedded learning. And you
Is
can
this
apply
available already for commercial use?
We have launched it this year. So yes, if you visit the Laptitude website of Glyn Games, you can buy this now. And as we said, the program was heavily invested in making sure this was available across the world, including in low middle income countries. And so the starting price point of this is €500 for the hardware, and the software subscription is $20 a month. And with the vision that in low and middle income countries, this could be a training center purchase, and in higher income countries, surgical residents can buy this to train at home themselves. And that's fully our intention. We want to create a community of users who are playing this game and enjoying it.
So you surprise your boss the next day how well you can operate now, and don't tell them that you used the game.
And I think that's very much the pain point that all of these things are trying to solve for. If you're a trainee in laparoscopic surgery, you very rarely get to operate. You're often holding the camera because it's not quite 10,000 hours, but you need to do a number of hours outside the patient in some kind of environment, which gives you a second nature ability to be able to use the instrumentation effectively. It's quite difficult, and it does take practice, and you can make that practice fun, or you can make that practice very dull.
Making it fun is the key thing, and I think all the parents out there will be thinking, yeah, I'm trying to cut down the number of hours my kids are playing games these days, and my son took me to see the Minecraft movie this weekend, which the less
Did you like it?
about, the better. 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. It's absolutely. I think the other great thing is it enables people to keep coming back. Right, you're right. The gradation aspect. If you put them in a traditional lap trainer, they're doing the actual procedure. Right, there's no starting simple and moving. You're right there, and once you've done the procedure, and then maybe you've mastered it after an hour or so, is there any reason to go back to the sim? Maybe
Yeah.
not, right?
If it's going to be exactly the same, and
Yes,
let's say it's a
exactly.
lap Coley, you've just done the lap Coley, you've maybe done it 3 times, you know exactly the anatomy you're uncovering, and
Yeah,
the next time you come, you can game it and do it in 2 minutes because you
yeah,
understand exactly the steps.
and
But
the
if you can
classes.
change the anatomy, if you can change the
Yeah,
anatomy each time they come back to it, then each simulation exercise becomes an anatomical puzzle to solve, just like it is with every single patient you see. The first part of an operation is exposing the area you need to operate on, and then finding the anatomy of what you're looking at.
and then,
And with generative AI technology, we can now do that. So we can make even that simulation exercise more interesting, because every time you come to do your gallbladder, we can give you a different shaped gallbladder or a different shaped liver with a different cystic duct and cystic artery configuration. So you can't game it now. You have to go through all of those cognitive processes of deciphering the anatomy, working out how you dissect the hepatocystic triangle, finding the cystic artery and cystic duct safely, making sure you've got the critical view of safety, and then applying your clips and removing the gallbladder. And it's
exactly.
different every time.
And decoupling it, because let's say in robotics, you got to use a sim on the robot. So you're either using the robot for surgery or you're using it for sim, right? So decoupling it from the actual device you use in surgery, if the racing car F Formula One driver had to be in his Formula One car every time he wanted to use the sim that they use, then yeah, so the fact that you have these driving games that you can play, but you don't have to be sitting in the car when you do it. It sounds funny, but that's actually what happens these days. That most of the time you have to be actually on the robot to use the robot sim, right? For urologists.
Unless the institutions are very rich, they can afford to buy a training console as well,
Yes, yes,
which really puts the budget up, doesn't it? And I think that's good. I think there are lots of low-cost solutions now for robotic training, and taking it out of the operating room. I have a kind of ridiculous anecdote. One of my friends partners had to go in over the weekends to train on the robot for 3 weeks running because that's the only time she could get on the console. And they had just adopted it. And I love this idea of distributed training so that you can train at home. And there are lots of potential solutions for that for robotic surgery. Lots of companies that have small footprint, very lightweight robotic input devices that coupled with our software would make that possible as well.
Fantastic. You know, one thing that struck me is as a doctor, you got to help X hundred patients a year, right? Having jumped
I hope I helped
industry,
most of them. There were some that I didn't catch.
Okay, we won't talk about that. But having jumped into industry and what you're doing now, you're helping millions of people, right? Many of
I hope so.
Yeah.
With the scale of MedTech now, if you get something right, let's think, so the Fogarty catheter, which was developed in the 1950s, fantastic device, sold something like 300 million now since its invention and inception. Fogarty was a medical student when he developed it. So his reach globally has been absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, you're right. If I'd stayed in urology as a career, I could probably have helped maybe 30, 40,000 people over that period of time. Now, I think sales of things like space or Boston way over that. So the ability to influence a pathway to get adoption and good, safe treatments into the hands of clinicians and being used on all of the eligible patients is transformative. It's not bigging it up. It's just the scale of MedTech companies work at now with safe procedures can really, really impact the lives of many, many patients.
100%.
So I think what we see is that you are super enthusiastic about training, games, and all this stuff. So what other trends are you expecting in the future following gamification?
So I think gamification, it opens a set of technologies into MedTech, a lot of parallel technologies. So we've been working on AI implementations. We're working on driving down the computing power required to run these things on very low cost devices. So whereas before you'd need a computer with a high-end graphics card, we can now get the number crunching down so you can run it on a smartphone. I think we'll see lots of this in the future. We talk about bloat in some software, but there is the opportunity to actually make things a lot more user-friendly. And we're seeing that in MedTech as well. So you now have sensors that are skin-based sensors that you can detect all kinds of abnormalities on very low footprint hardware. So I think the ability to get code base down to a level which means you can deploy it on smaller and smaller things, I think is going to be transformative. I think the AI revolution is definitely here. And I think on the training side, it offers huge potential for training with generated patient interactions, generative AI models for training. The other trends, robotics is definitely here to stay. And I think even though the project I've been working on has been laparoscopic, I think its robotic utilization will be greater in the future. I think the plethora of robotic companies coming into the market offering different price points which are accessible in low middle income countries, I think is going to be superb for creating safe, minimally invasive surgery. We know one of my recent speakers on another event highlighted the fact that poor people need minimally invasive surgery more than rich people, because if you're a poor person and you get MIS, you recover quickly and can get back to work. So getting that into low middle income countries in a successful way is super important for global access to surgery. The expansion of robots into so many different parts of surgery, from urology through to neurosurgery, thoracics, and all of the other soft tissue surgery, as well as orthopedics, super transformative. I think this is the big thing that's happening. And then again, this focus which is being driven by regulation for enhanced patient safety and reporting will mean that we can do all of these transformative technologies and still make sure that we're doing things for the benefit of the patient. I would hate to think that MedTech would steer away from always being so patient-centric. I was very pleasantly surprised when I came into MedTech that the values that I held as a doctor were being completely reflected by the companies that I have worked for. Every company I've worked for has always put patients first, and that was a really nice thing for me to see. I see people walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Yeah, 100%. Glyn, I think you've had an absolutely fascinating career, right? From your early days as a medic through to joining the industry, and some of these projects and things that you've been involved with
Thanks.
are absolutely incredible. And I think you're going to carry on and develop more and more things that are going to go on to help millions of people. But a question that we always ask is, what are the three things you know now that you wish you'd known then? And the then part of it, you can define yourself. Like, at which part of your multi part career did you wish you'd known then?
I hadn't thought about this before. Only at the beginning when Silke warned me that this question was coming up. I knew it was coming up because I'd seen the Steve Bell one. So my first one is, no matter how bad things are at any given moment, and this reflects my HIV diagnosis, things will get better. And things for me got better in a very silver lining to the cloud way. I was able to move to Europe. I was able to enjoy living in a different culture. I'm not a linguist. And so for me, the idea of practicing medicine in a foreign language would have been absolutely hopeless, especially in neurology. So being able to do something completely different and live in a different place, that was a huge improvement in my life. I'm not saying I would never go back to the UK, but it's enabled me to live in different cultures and appreciate them more. The grass isn't always greener somewhere else, but it can be. And moving forwards and making a decision is always the right choice. So whatever it is you decide, it will be the right thing for you in the end. And that's very important too. And the third thing is those cultural differences that we talked about a little bit are very important. And one of the things I learned very late in life is that I'm a little bit neurodivergent. I think everyone who knows me ever since I was a kid could have told me that, and I wish that they had. But I don't think we had the words for it back in the 1970s and 1980s in the way that we can describe it now. So that combination of my neurodivergence and being culturally embroiled with people from the United States and Japan and China and Europe and places, work harder at that is what I tell myself.
I think we had words for it back in the 70s, but we can't use them today.
They're not nice words, yes.
No. Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, your incredible career, the choices that you've made, and making the most of all these opportunities that you came across. It's absolutely incredible. It's been absolutely fascinating and a delight. And thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable as well. I think that's come through, and we do appreciate that. And I hope that this will get a lot of people thinking, maybe some medics, about the other choices they have and where they can use their medical training in the future.
Thank you. There's many, many ways, many, many different avenues.
Thank you, Glyn.
Thank you, Silke. Thank you, Cash.
Thank you for tuning into our MedTech Lives. You have been listening to Zilka Riemer and Cash Ikran. We're committed to bringing you insights and stories that inspire and inform the medical community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network.